Hey guys, welcome back to Game Changers Podcast. This is your co-host Harsh and Jaden, and today with us we have a very special guest, an extremely knowledgeable person, someone I think we can all look up to and learn from. He is Yancey Strickler, co-founder of Kickstarter and former CEO of Kickstarter, a multi-million dollar company which allowed other entrepreneurs to get funding for their business. He's an author. He's founded a great concepts like Bentoism, and we're gonna have an amazing conversation with him today, getting to know a little bit more about all that stuff and a bit about him as a person. So welcome, Yancey.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate that. Appreciate that.
That's good to have you on here.
So I guess Yancey, to start off, tell us what's going on for you now. You stepped down from Kickstarter a while ago. What's going on in your life right now?
Well, there's this thing called COVID-19, and no, yeah, I stepped away from Kickstarter 3 years ago after working on that for over 10 years. I first focused on writing a book. I spent a year and a half writing kind of a philosophical manifesto, imagining really a kind of an optimistic vision for the future, and how I think forces that are currently at play are evolving and how they're going to shift the world. And out of that came this idea of Bentoism, which is a framework and a philosophy for identifying our real self-interest and a way for us to see beyond this sort of passive awareness that we have of the world, where we only see things according to what now me wants, what our individualist short-term desires are. And Bentoism instead argues that our self-interest is four-dimensional. It is now me, what we want right now as individuals. It's also future me, what the older, wiser version of us that we hope to become wants us to do. Like that person becomes real or not real based on the choices we make. There's also now us, the people in our lives who we're responsible for and who we care about, whose our choices impact them all the time. And then future us, because our choices, of course, affect our kids and everybody else's kids too. And so the limitation of our most recent world and what we have today is extreme focused on now me self-interest. And we see anything beyond now me as like nebulous, emotional, less real somehow. But like our best selves and our full potential lie in seeing that full dimensionality of ourselves. And so I teach this in workshops 3 times a week, all on Zoom, and that's under an umbrella called the Bento Society. And that's a group of now 200 strong people who are really approaching life through the lens of these dimensions of themselves, who are coming together on a weekly basis, and we think are modeling out a different way to think about life. And so the larger cause I'm on is on this notion of shifting how we see self-interest. And I believe by doing that, it shifts the values that are important in our society. It shifts the way we make collective decisions. It changes what's valuable. And my feeling is that by changing our perception of our responsibilities to ourselves and one another, that's where the best possible version of us exists. And I'm very optimistic about people. I think we're all doing the best we can with what we know. So the question is, well, what don't we know that could help us? And I believe like really seeing our impact in this clearer way is like the crucial shift that I'm just convinced all kinds of great stuff is on the other side of.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. That's a concept that's very foreign to me. I've never heard of it. So in layman's terms, I feel like it'd be helpful if you gave an example. So let's say, how would you, in your own personal situation, apply this theory if you came to it?
Yeah. So what I teach people to do in these workshops, and you can go to bentoism.org to like see what it looks like. But just picture a simple 4 boxes, a 2x2 matrix. And the bottom left is now me, and the bottom right is future me, and the top left is now us, and the top right is future us. And in each of these, I have an idea of what my values and priorities are. I did this by going through a simple brainstorming exercise where I write down, well, what does my now me want and need? Like on a daily basis, what do I need to feel safe and secure? I need to be healthy. I need to exercise. I need to be loved. I need to be working on something that's challenging, right? You like draw out what it is you need. But then you also ask your future self. So for me to live up to like the ultimate version of me, what is true of that person? And there's sort of exercise you can go through to try to visualize that future version of yourself. I think of it as like my inner Obi-Wan Kenobi that I want to one day become. And I'm trying to like
Yeah.
that person whisper to me, words of wisdom. To think about my us, I picture all the people I care about the most, my family, my core friends, coworkers. And I visualize them all sitting together on a couch. And I like take a Polaroid when they're all together and I picture their faces. And I like make decisions trying to think about those people. And then the future us is similar. Now, I use this practically in two different ways all the time. Number one is that every week, and this is one of the Zoom workshops I do, every week I make my to-do list using the bento. And so I draw a blank bento and I say, right at the top, how should I use my energy in the next 7 days? And I ask each box individually. So I ask my now me, well, what do I need to do in the next 7 days? And my now me is always like my work stuff, my errands, just like the things you have to do. What's on your to-do list? When I ask my future me, what does it want me to do in the next 7 days to become them? My future me will like remind me of a skill I'm trying to master, or like a certain discipline or ritual I've been keeping up, like to make sure I keep doing it. It reminds me to learn, and it's sort of like always highlighting these things that don't have this immediate payoff, but are like building towards something. My now us, I'm picturing that couch and I'm literally writing down the list of friends that like I feel like I need to give some love to. Who haven't I talked to? And so every week I'm writing down like the top 4 people that I feel like I need to be more in touch with. And they go on my to-do list for the week ahead. And the future us, I'm imagining, let's picture the butterfly effect is real. And that whatever small things I do now will have implications much longer. Well, what should I do differently if I'm conscious about that? How could I be more of a teacher? How could I set a better example? And again, I write these things down and I translate these into like a literal to-do list that I cross off and to where I am actively manifesting who I want to become. Because otherwise I'm waiting for the day that I magically wake up and I am that person.
Yeah.
Right? Like how, and I'm waiting for the world to somehow become what I think it should be. Why? Because I'm wishing really hard. Like, no, it's about being active. So that's one way. The other way I use it is to make decisions. So I have in each of my bentos, and I'm looking at it right now in front of me, I have like my core values. I'll hold it in front of you. I have my core goal. So my now me bento, it wants to show people the matrix. When I went through this whole exercise, I came down to like, when am I my best self? It's when I'm like connecting ideas, showing people how the world works. And that's like what makes me happy. I think that's my greatest skill. So like, that's my now me. That's what it wants to do. My future me is telling me to create harmony. My parents divorced when I was young. So my whole life was like being a peacemaker. I'm always a peacemaker. That's also a problem, but that's like something important to me. And also this value of never selling out. Like when I went through what's so core to me, it's like abandoning a person or my values for reasons of money. That was like the worst thing I could imagine doing. So like that voice is always telling me that. My now us is telling me about to have deep time, real focused time with a core group of friends. Like when I'm with my friends, never look at my phone, like always be there, be that friend. That's who I need to be for people. And my future us, what's the world I want to see? I want a world with a better matrix. Not that there isn't a matrix, but like how is the matrix helping us out? So when I face choices, I ask them against these boxes. So like a literal choice I got, or question I got was, I got asked to do a paid speech for a company that I don't respect and that I don't like. And whenever I've been asked to do those in the past, I've always said no. Because I'm just like, hell no, like you suck. Why would I do that? And I got asked that after I made my bento, after I had this idea, and I thought I got to ask this question. So the way you ask your bento is you ask each dimension of yourself individually, because they're all going to have different voices. So my now me, which says show people the matrix, it says, yo, like doing a talk sounds great. We're showing people the matrix, like that's what we do. My now us, which wants deep time, says, yeah, hour and a half to talk about ideas. Like we're down, that's cool. We got no problem with that. My future us, which wants a better matrix, says, yo, like you can't just be preaching to the choir. This is exactly what you got to be doing. Yes, you should do it. And then my future me voice, which has this voice of don't sell out, said, no, you're just doing this for the money. You're corrupting yourself. And I realized that this voice that had made me say no to these things in the past was my future me. And then my future me was like a bouncer looking out for my values. This big dude standing outside that said, no, like you can't come in. But yet, because I could look at like my entire self, because I could think like coherently about myself, I could overrule that voice. I could say, no, it's cool. I got this. And I could do it knowing that I wasn't betraying a core value. Like normally for me, doing something that is for money makes me extremely uncomfortable. But in this case, I could really look at myself and be like, you know what? Actually, the thing that does fulfill me and who I most deeply am is totally the opposite of what I thought it was going to be. So I'm constantly striving towards this kind of coherence, is the word I use, where I'm like acting in a way that's like in integrity with who I am. Because what I've learned, what I've learned is two things. One, that it feels better. It feels better. But two, and I think maybe most importantly, is that I'm just much better at it. Like I'm much better at doing things when I try to do them this way. Just things play out better. And it's because I'm doing things in a way that I think naturally fits with who I am, what I care about, what I'm good at. And so that they all just sort of come together in this really positive way. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's the bento.
Yeah, and it seems like lots of people agree with you because on your book here has a lot of people that agreed with it and gave references for the back, like the Wall Street Journal, Simon Sinek, and Seth Godin, some really popular artists or popular authors in the business space there.
Yeah, no, I was very yeah, I mean, I was a writer, before Kickstarter, I was a journalist. I was a music journalist and I was a writer. It was my first time as an author. And, but yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic process. And I was very fortunate to have some of those folks read it and really love it. I wasn't, I felt, I think the right word is terrified about the of my book, and it felt like to me like the biggest swing I could possibly take, and which is why I took it. But of course, as you're doing it, you're like, oh wait, this is a big swing. This is a big thing, and so there's a lot of imposter syndrome feeling, that I felt through Kickstarter too. That's partially my own internal story. But the process of trying to spend a year and a half to become clear about an idea, to try to express it in a way where you're trying to create a very specific feeling in a reader, and then to go through the process of having to defend that and to interact with people about it. It teaches you a lot. And for me, the post-COVID has been a real tremendous learning experience because I just immediately just started doing weekly workshops, and the same way I was like journaling every Sunday, my to-do list for the week ahead using the bento. Second week of COVID, I thought, well, why don't I just see if anyone wants to do this with me? Like all I'm doing is writing on a piece of paper. I could easily just have the camera on and like just give someone else directions and we do it together. So I did it that first week, and I think 25 people showed up and they loved it, and it just worked. And so we just have kept doing it. And so COVID, did open up this space where we all had to adjust. We had to adjust our time. We had to adjust our definitions of ourselves. And we've all had to been put in this place of questioning and 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 having a moment of pause, like mandatory mass reflection and pause. It just is outrageous. It's an outrageous sort of experience we're going through, and so the bento has been I think a really relevant way to make sense of the world we're in now, because like the short-term individualism of before is clearly like kind of death now. If like that's all you're doing, you're miserable at this moment. Like you need other people, you need long goals, you need an idea of what the world is going to look like, other than I hope we go back to January 2020 soon. And so this is just our real life events are forcing us to evolve. And what's wild to me is I just keep thinking, like, to future generations, this moment will be inevitable, right? Like now, if you think about JFK, if someone talks about JFK, you immediately think, oh yeah, like this promise unfulfilled, like this guy that got killed at brutally at this moment. It's like what a loss. The future is going to look at the economy and the world that we had, especially between the 1980s and the 2020, as this thing that was like this, this out of control party, but that had this inevitable brutal stop coming that we didn't see,
true.
right? And then in the past, it's all just going to be looked at that way. And in the future, we're going to be looked back at that as like, that was always going to happen. That was always going to happen. And so how it will be judged is, what do we do with this moment, right? Yeah. The party was always going to stop in February 2020, and the question is, how did people respond? And like only those of us alive now will perceive how unexpected. We'll know what a record scratch it is. But for all future moments, this is just inevitable. This is just something that, of course, was always happening. And so it's just. It's just interesting because we are the ones who are navigating this, right? We are the most blind. We know the most. We're also the most blind, and we are the ones that have to navigate this moment.
Yeah, and I agree with you. That's like a forced reflection, because I don't know about you, Harsh. I don't know if you probably have experienced something like this, but for me, like I'm usually like fast go everywhere, like I'm busy all the time. But then once COVID started, I had to slow down. I kind of realized who I was as a person, discovered my interests, like what my passion is, like, and kind of really took a look at everything. And I ended up by accident like starting my first like actual business, and stuff kind of started and was forced into flow because of COVID. It just forced me to slow down and look at things from a different perspective.
And I think that's like when you talk about the half glass full, half glass empty, I think this is like the half glass full part, where especially for Gen Zs and like our generation, there's even millennials, we're exposed to so much stimulation, and we're so busy all the time and so distracted in our day to day, just busy being busy, and where there's a lack of time where we're spending just with ourselves and just creating some self awareness and reflecting on our values, our experiences, who we are as a person. Like you said about Bentoism, right? Like who we want, what we want now, and what we want in the future, and what we need to do now to get to that future self. And I think it's that's one of the most beautiful things to come out of this, where even for me personally, like I've developed a lot. You're forced into this uncomfortable situation where you have no choice but to grow, learn, and adapt. And I think a lot of people, obviously there's been a lot of loss and like tragedy, but there's also been a lot of growth for a lot of people. And the people that know how to take advantage of an opportunity or make their own opportunities, I think those people have really found success through this and just created so much self-awareness and learned so much about themselves. and now they know a lot more about who they want to become.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's I mean, I don't know how to sound trite except to say the world, there is no going back to the world before. And we're on a new script. And the script, the map we've been using to make sense of the world doesn't apply anymore. And we still haven't learned. It's going to take us a while to figure that out. But this is something fundamentally different. And so in a space like this, it is legitimately terrifying. And every fear we feel is just. This is also a moment that is extraordinarily opportunistic, where because our maps have been made irrelevant, anybody saying, "Hey, here's where we're going. Here's the deal," has the potential to be heard, because I think genuinely nobody really knows. And so there is the opportunity, if you speak with authority and boldness, and you have a story that makes sense, and it seems to reflect the world around us more truthfully than what we believed before, I think you have a high likelihood of being adopted at this moment. I mean, there's a very famous phrase called a paradigm shift. Undoubtedly, you've heard the phrase paradigm shift before.
I've heard it, yeah.
Yeah, and it comes from this book called the Structure of Scientific Revolutions, written by this man named Thomas Kuhn in the 1960s. And it's a book analyzing how science has evolved. And what he finds is that science will operate off of a certain theory of the world, like Copernicus' theory of like how the Earth and the Sun move around one another, and that the science will operate according to that theory. But then over time, there will become enough sort of like anomalies in the data or in a like observed reality that don't make sense according to that theory. And that at a certain point, that world will go into a kind of a crisis state where everyone's like, what the hell, what's up, what's down? And that out of this crisis state, what will emerge is what he calls a paradigm shift. And a paradigm is a new way of defining reality that allows the things that didn't make sense in the previous regime to now make sense. So you're sort of like taking what is irrational but real, and instead making it real and rational. And by then better explaining the world, then you become a more valuable lens for seeing the world. And then that starts to become how everyone operates, all their mindsets operate. And so he talks about there being these sort of series of steps. One is a crisis. We're having the crisis now. Number two is then the paradigm. So then what is the argument for the new way of seeing the world that makes more sense than the previous way of seeing? And then the third step is what he calls normal science. And this is where scientists, regular people have the paradigm, have the new theory about how things work, and then they actually try using it. And then when they try using it, they discover, just through the iterative process of science, what is true and what is untrue about that idea. And as that process goes on and you sort of like close off certain doors and open up other ones, you create like laws and real knowledge. And it goes from a theory to like something that is practical and usable in every situation. And that we're constantly, like knowledge is constantly turning in this way. And so a goal of profit maximization, individual fulfillment, that has been the dominant story of the past 50 years. That is like what has driven the culture of the past 50 years. That can no longer be the culture, because the challenges we have now are climate change. That's a collective problem that cannot be solved by money. We also have all sorts of collective social problems that have arisen because of our extreme individualism. We're also growing up and now as networked organisms because of the internet. And so the way we think about ourselves is going to be less individualistic over time. And finally, in the next 20 years, all of the boomers will die. All of the boomers will die. And instead, my generation, Generation X, we will be the oldest generation. It'll go Gen X, it'll go then, then Millennial, then Gen Z, and then Gen COVID, right? And we will be the four generations making up the world. And we are going to have a very different view of the world. And so you're going to see by 2040, because we're going to see many folks, older folks die over the next 2 decades. By 2040, you're going to see a dramatically different populace, and the world is going to be made in their image. So these are the gears that are happening now, and they're going to play out. They're going to play out in certain ways, but the people raising their voices, lobbing ideas into the ring, is just hugely impactful right now. And because nobody knows, and so if you have promise, if you have a good story, if you can provide some value, you're apt to be listened to at a moment like this.
Yeah. So people won't be able to say like okay boomer anymore about it. But I'm curious. So now you live in Canada, where it's a little bit more peaceful. We're a small country with like 37 million people. We're not as profit based, and we've done fairly well with COVID. What are your thoughts looking at the U.S. from different territory, from Canada? What's your point of view?
Yeah, I am an American. I grew up in Virginia, in like the South, on a farm in Appalachia, and I lived in New York for 20 years, and then lived in LA for 2 years, and then I moved here to Vancouver about 3 months ago, right at the start of COVID. My wife is from here. We've been long planning this, but it got accelerated with COVID. I think that the United States is proving that it's not an advanced society right now.
Yeah.
And we've been searching early in COVID. People would point out like, oh, there's very little breakouts in Asia, but yet, so somehow South Korea and Japan and Vietnam and Canada and the Scandinavian countries, they all have this under control. We don't know what's different about those countries in the U.S., but they do. Well, I think what's different is that those are advanced societies. And what makes them advanced societies is that there is social trust, and that there are institutions that are seen as being in support of the public, and that people believe in them, and that there have been consistent investments made in social capital, social value over time. And where, I like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the theory of how humans work, where at the base level, humans need safety and security. At the second level, they need others. The third level, they need self-esteem, and on up. Well, the U.S. has basically climbed to the top of that financial security rung of just like wealth. And the U.S. is just partying like they've reached the summit and not seeing that there's a next rung. The next rung is creating social wealth. The next rung is caring about each other. And just the culture of the U.S. has made that very difficult. And so here we're seeing this limitation of like the wealthiest poor nation in the world, and the U.S. is really impoverished in these ways that are so critical right now of public trust, public institutions, just a collective sense of identity, and it's challenging. I think I had assumed Donald Trump would get reelected after he was elected. At this point, it seems like all the polls seem to suggest he will not be. In some ways, I think the future of the U.S., as weird as it sounds, it might be the same regardless of who wins this election. I think that the wounds suffered during the Trump era have been pretty extraordinary, and especially from COVID. And if we're in a place of what it looks like, which is maybe there's like 100,000 new cases a day in the U.S. starting within about a month, and we're there for a while, that's a kind of situation that's really unprecedented. And So I have great fear, but betting against the U.S. is a bad idea.
Yeah, yeah,
Like there's
exactly.
so much intelligence, so many different kinds of wealth, but if someone came to you and said, "Guess what? The story of the 21st century was that the U.S. had the biggest choke job in history of like giving up a 3-0 lead, and then China took over the world by 2030 and was the new dominant superpower in the world," you would probably nod and say, "Yeah, that makes sense. Like I could see
Yeah,
that."
Japan did it in the 80s, right?
So I mean, Japan fizzled out. I mean, they reached a summit and then got pulled down by their own bubble. But yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know. I think the U.S. is in a tough spot, but the world is in a tough spot, and there do become these challenges like you see with the Roman Empire, and some people are already calling this where just nations and organizations and systems become so big, so diverse, so interconnected, so siloed, that it becomes just extraordinarily difficult to hold them together.
Yeah.
And so I think there are a lot of challenging things, but yeah, it's a tough time.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point of view.
And I completely agree because at the end of the day, it's a democratic country, right? Like the Trump didn't just find his way to power. Like people, like citizens of the country voted for him to be in power, right? So I think that in itself kind of shows a bit of, like you said, it's the wealthiest, most impoverished country. Um,
Also consider that 3 million people voted for him than the other person, and he still won. There's also that to consider.
that's true. That's
And
true.
and yeah, and yeah, in the U.S., of the 5 presidential contests of the 21st century, the Democrat has won 4 out of 5, but they've only won the presidency twice out of 5. So it is also now a non-democratic system.
Mhm.
Um, so it's crazy. I mean, the U.S. is
Yeah.
we're really in a situation. But moving to Canada is interesting, because I think that there is. My wife is a Canadian. Explained to me, she said she felt like growing up, she was taught that the goal is to be number two. Because she's like, being number one, there's so much pressure, but being number two is just right. And so she's like, I was raised to think, like, go for number two because it's like going to be the most enjoyable, and you're still great. Um,
Yeah, lots of people believe in like the middle power status here.
yeah, yeah. Tell me about that. Tell me about middle power status.
Um, yeah, I've been reading a few books about it recently. For me personally, I don't know. I'm really interested in like politics, so I'm really attracted to the superpowers because there's lots going on there. But middle power, it seems like there's way less corruption. There,
Mm.
you aren't really targeted much. Like people here in Canada, we take pride in trying to lend a helping hand. Basically, it's uh it's it's like a status quo that we need to fill because we were given that reputation before, so now people see that as one of their main values. And yeah, basically, um yeah, people here, they they kind of like being the middle power because uh there's not as much pressure. Like you can go to your lawyer job, but then after you just clock out, you can kind of chill out, and then there's lots here like people just it's hard to explain it, but yeah,
Yeah.
people here just kind of like being with nature. It's not really filled with like huge metropolises, is what I've heard lots of people say. They just kind of like being more like grounded, down to earth. If I'm explaining it well, I don't.
Yeah, and I think personally, like it's what I've seen in terms of what I notice is there's a lot less competition. Um, we're the United States has 10 times more people than we do, and with more people, there's a lot more competition in every industry, right? People are fighting for survival, for a profitable career, a profitable life in terms of on a personal basis. So I think here there's I think a lot of who you are as a person really depends on where you live and the environment you're surrounded in. I mean, even if you go from Edmonton or even from Vancouver, like from Edmonton to Vancouver, maybe even in Toronto, you could possibly see that culture that you would see in the U.S. just because there's so many people, there's so much hustle, there's so much competition in your environment that you really do strive for that first place because everyone around you is also doing the same. Whereas in Edmonton, it's very laid back. People are very content with their lifestyle, and I think it really depends on your geographical location for sure.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that actually. That got me thinking. So in Canada, like the value of the individual is different here because look at it from a political perspective. Someone in Canada could they could run for prime minister and they could get it if they're born even in poverty. If they're born in poverty, they could become the prime minister if they wanted to. And I don't really see someone couldn't really be born in poverty and then become the president of the United States. It's way harder. There's more of a system there and more of an establishment.
Like more of a class system, essentially, even like kind of like the richer get richer and poor get poorer. And I think in Canada, there's more of an even playing field. I think, like personally, I've seen like if you want to do something, there's opportunity for you here. Whereas in the U.S., it's kind of like if you have money, then you have a lot better of a chance of being successful than someone who's just starting from scratch. And yeah, I think even just the communities, like I think Canada is something, some like we started from scratch, absolutely zero, where we're just a bunch of university kids. But the community is so supportive in terms of giving you an opportunity, giving you a chance to grow from the bottom. And I feel like there's a lack of that in the U.S. You really do have to. There's a lot of criticism. You really do have to work on something for a while to really build it on from the ground up.
Is there a mindset here of like is the US a warning story? Like did is that I can imagine there are things to emulate. There are also things that maybe you would think you wouldn't want to emulate. Is
Yeah.
the US looked at as that kind of thing? Like we're scouting out different opportunities for us, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, basically, it's kind of weird because I'm a big fan of the U.S., but I will tell you the overwhelming majority in Canada kind of see as a warning sign. Like we all of us here follow U.S. politics, like pretty much everyone in Canada. But like my parents will come running downstairs in the morning. They're like, "Man, Donald Trump just did this stupid thing. Like the U.S. did this. They have so many cases." And people here often, I feel like we'd be more likely to look up to countries like Germany or Japan or like Britain or something that they're more settled down and they kind of have a bit more of a moral compass, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you that last point about having a moral compass is something I agree with as well. Like when you say what we think of the U.S., I think a lot of us are like, thank God we're not in the U.S. Like, thank God we're not under that sort of leadership. And personally, like I've always wanted to go to the U.S. because it's always so glorified, right? The American lifestyle, living in L.A., New York. But I think after recent times, I've seen like it really matters about in terms of like what's the leadership of your country, the community, what the values are of the people that are around you, how do you fit in, are you able to achieve personal and professional success, to what degree, how difficult is it. And I think that people have a different set of values. I think if you're someone who's very focused on the economic side and you're like, hey, I just want to build a profitable business, and you have that kind of mindset, maybe the US is for you, right? And you have a lot of money. But for someone like me, I really value the people around me and their mindset and their openness. And I think we have that sort of a community here in Canada. Wherever you go, I think the society is very well diverse in terms of cultures and religion. People are very open minded. People are very aware of the right values, morals, and ethics.
So
And
do you
yeah,
think of yourselves as like, say, as young Canadians, like, do you feel a responsibility to uphold those things? Like, do you have a notion of what it would mean if you felt your society like going in a wrong direction or anything like that? Or do you feel those traits are strong in your friends and communities of people?
100%. I think you can really sense it, even just the ways of minor interactions. Like I've been to the U.S. multiple times. Minor interactions. We're talking about opportunity, professional opportunity. Leadership, even in terms of like the COVID situation, even in Black Lives Matter. Like, yeah, there is racism in Canada, but everything that's going on with Black Lives Matter like in the US, there's no chance that could, it's very difficult for that to happen in Canada because if people have such an open mind, people have such, even with Justin Trudeau, like you see what he's done with providing people compensation with CRB and COVID, and just focusing on people's well-being. And I think the difference is Canada is a people-centric uh, country, and the United States is an economic-centric country. And I think, for me, I think personally, I value people more because if your people aren't happy, then what's the point of having a good economy, right? So, and other people think differently, but that's my perspective to answer your question.
Yeah, I mean that's valuable. I mean, I being here, I have felt more of an American, because I think um, I assume a certain intent or certain skepticism or set of beliefs
Yeah.
that maybe as an American, especially the American point of view, is also like we are the world. So I just sort of imagined everyone
Yeah.
adopted, right? And so I think it is, I'm already learning a lot through through this experience. And I think, my book and my ideas are really almost are like what I'm holding as the challenge is kind of the American ideal, which I think has been exported around the world. And, maybe places like Canada have done a good job of putting that perspective in check. But it is trying to make the case, especially to business leaders and people with a lot of influence, I think, to adopt some of the, perspective and maybe, you know, humility is probably not a word any of those folks would want to embrace, but maybe the humility that comes with this a little bit of, hey, it's not just about me, it's not just about you. There's a bigger picture here. But yeah, I mean, I'm on board. I plan to be here,
Mhm.
good. So I'm super
Awesome.
into it.
And we're happy to have
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
But I think going off of all this, we've had a lot of conversation about politics, ideas, COVID. But now I want to talk a little bit about you specifically as a person, Yancey, and talk about your story as an entrepreneur. In your earlier days when you did go from being in on a farm in Virginia to starting Kickstarter, and we're talking earlier about this where you had this feeling after on your last day. But I think just to start, I'll focus on the start for. I want to know how you, I guess, even had that self-awareness of that's what you wanted to create. I mean, especially because in smaller cities or small towns, you really just focus on you open a local business, you do local work, and you just it's a very close-knit community. And I want to know how you got started with Kickstarter and how that really unfolded.
Yeah. Well, just for our own note, like I'll need to stop in probably like 10 minutes or so. I have
Yeah.
like got another thing to start.
Sure.
Um, you know, I started as a music critic, as a journalist, reviewing records for places like Pitchfork and Spin Magazine, and you know, I didn't intend to be an entrepreneur. I like got jobs inside existing companies doing editorial kind of things, and just discovered that I was good at organizational thinking and like really thrived in those kinds of environments. Weirdly, I felt like I was an artist, so I felt conflicted to be good at those things. It was like I didn't want to be good at the things that I was good at. And then um, it was during that time I met a new friend, a guy named Perry Chin, and I met Perry. He worked at a restaurant where I went a lot and hung out, like a very cool restaurant in Brooklyn. And and one day he asked me to hang out after service, and then he told me about this idea he had, which was the idea for crowdfunding. And this was in 2005, and uh, and so we started working on this idea together. And I had no intention of starting a company, and neither did he. But the idea was so compelling, and we were very specifically focused on the notion of funding creative projects, helping artistic projects using crowdfunding, like to create new ideas, not to do charity or any other things that we saw it could be used for. And and to that goal of just, could we create a universe where new ideas, creative projects could be funded, not because they were a good investment, but just because people wanted them to. Because the money you're putting into Kickstarter projects, there's no financial upside. It's not an investment. It's somewhere between a pre-order and a donation. And and so could we create a universe where ideas are funded without that selfish upside to motivate it, but instead just because it's cool, or because like the creator's cute, or just like, you know, this tech would be rad. And 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 so, you know, there was like 4 years of since after I got involved, of trying and failing to get the site off the ground. Me and Perry, and then Charles Adler, who we met shortly afterwards, it's also Kickstarter co-founder. We're not engineers. Um, we all more had artistic, creative backgrounds. So there was a big challenge of like not having the skill sets we needed to execute. But it did, you know, it did of course launch after 4 years. But one of the things that was so critical, I mean, as people, Charles and Perry and I are all quite different, um, but on like the core level of what our idea of success was, we had a lot of agreement. You know, we all came from music and art, and to us, like the idea of selling out, you know, making something and then like commercially exploiting it so you could pull yourself out of the scene was like the most shameful thing you could do. And so we had this mindset from the beginning that we wanted to build an institution. We wanted to build something that was never going to try to leave the community. It was always going to be there to support the community, and that the community be more important than the platform itself. And that it would just have that kind of like public trust service orientation at its heart. And so that meant that we couldn't try to profit maximize. We wouldn't try to flip it. We wouldn't try to raise as much VC money as possible. Like there were all these choices that went off the board for us because of this specific notion of success that we had. And as we started having success, we didn't deviate from those positions. In fact, they became even more important to us because they distinguished us from, you know, other tech companies. And they ultimately came to be real great assets of differentiation in the market and versus competitors. And we came to feel a responsibility to these choices we've made, like, say, becoming a public benefit corporation or choosing to not to become public. And we felt a responsibility with those decisions that we were trying to model out a different kind of behavior for future entrepreneurs. And so we were thinking about those choices, not just in terms of like what was right for us, but thinking for the people starting something now, how do we make it easier for them to like not just take the greedy, money hungry path, which is what a society is going to default, an American society is going to default its businesses into being. And so that was just like a conscious daily thought to try to end up on that different kind of destination.
Yeah, and I'm curious. So, one dream of mine is that I want to move to New York for at least a few years or like a decade in my life. It just seems like such a prosperous city, but the thing is, not everyone can make it there. Like there's a common saying that if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. So was it hard for you to get started there? For you guys being in New York, was it harder or easier? And did you feel like you made it there and you can make it anywhere, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I moved to New York, I guess, for some of those same reasons. If it just seemed like the place.
Yeah.
And I moved there right out of college. I hated it my first 2 years, but the trick is like you're too broke to leave, and so you're just
Yeah.
kind of trapped until you figure it out. So I ended up doing 20 years after like being miserable the first two. So it is a city that puts you in just high pressure, like surrounds you with extremely accomplished people trying to be accomplished. But I think that I think the internet is New York now. I don't think you need New York. I think you just
Yeah.
need the internet. I think that's where all the cool people are, and because it's where everybody
Yeah,
is.
that makes sense.
And so I think that the need for those physical scenes, and I think this might be to our detriment potentially, but I think that is going to be less important, and that it's going to be like, the internet's going to be just a better version of that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so Yancey, I guess I know you have to go soon, but just to finally ask like 2, 3 last questions. What was it like? Obviously, you spent so much time building Kickstarter. What was the moment like when you really realized that you've built a success with the platform? You and Perry Chen together have built this successful company that is just from the ground up. And what was that moment like for you? And even just even we were talking about this earlier, but even just leaving on on your last day after building something up, something from the ground up, and looking back at it and saying, who would have thought, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a just an amazing experience for me. Just being able to see that journey of an idea going from kind of 0 to 60, to know firsthand what it takes to do that, to have those like experiences that create relationships, and all that is just like it's just such an amazing period of my life, and and I think even if it hadn't turned out as well as it did in the end, I think a lot of the meaning would still be there of just pushing yourself, right? Just doing something that you didn't know whether you could do, um, and just the amount of like maturation and that happens in that is it's really amazing. And um, but these things don't last forever. I mean that's what is difficult. I mean, maybe sometimes they can, but um, generally, I think we all have just so many. We can only run so many legs of the race, right? It's like you can't do the whole thing, and jobs like being a startup founder, being a startup CEO, those are such high intensity jobs. You can't do them exceptionally well for that long. Like I think you need breaks, you need structures, or you need the notion of like I'm going to do this for 5 years, and then the next person who's right to do this will do it, for what's right at that moment in the organization's life. But for me, after after 10 years of it, like I was tired, and I honestly just felt like I probably wasn't the best person to do that job. That like I'd never been the CEO of a 150 person company before. I'd never, all these things that were new, and I liked those challenges, and I felt I was good at them. But there was also like there's a fair number of things here I'm having to learn how to do for the first time. And is that what we need? Is that the right thing? And so, so I, after a lot of soul searching, like I opened up that conversation, and in the end, came to the conclusion, which is not what I wanted, but came to not what I intended when I began, but came to the conclusion that, yeah, I don't think I should do this anymore. And that was very, very hard, and left me lost for a while. But I do remember on the very last day, I gave an all hands to the company and told the company about this, and afterwards, like, everyone, I give like this 5-minute talk, and everyone give this standing ovation, hugging all these people that I love, and walked out the door not long after. And I came to feel like this was for me personally, like what like a storybook kind of ending, of thinking of meeting a friend in a restaurant, and it turns into all of this 10 years later, and really creating an institution, creating a thing that does good in the world, that fulfills its purpose, and just feeling grateful, and just thinking like, I got everything I could have asked out of this and more. And I could keep hanging around trying to squeeze out, a little bit more meaning, a little bit more ego, a little bit more whatever out of it. But I don't know, is that necessary? Or hasn't this already been like way beyond what I could have ever asked?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a very positive place to get to, right? To be able to appreciate what it is, and not want it to be more. And so I think even recognizing that is all part of this larger experience of whether it's entrepreneurialism or anything else, where you just put yourself to the test, and the amount of knowledge that on the other side of that, and the ability you have to hold yourself in a way that isn't selfish, that is like in service. All those things you just accelerate, and really blossom in a person. And so, like, I would wish for everyone to have experiences like that, whether it's entrepreneurial or service or creatively or whatever that is for you. Just those kinds of tests, those kinds of crucibles are just tremendous. And the world and COVID is putting all of us through one right now. And so how each of us navigates this, right? It's really maturing us and changing us. And so, you know, these are all opportunities to manifest better and better versions of ourselves, to live up to our bento, to become coherent with who we most deeply are. And they're just invitations to do that and to step up. And I would encourage people to not let them go by.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I guess first of all, I want to acknowledge I think even as an entrepreneur myself, I think there's huge courage and huge strength that's required to really say, just accept that, you just don't find happiness in something, and something that you've built, and something that's comfortable, and just leaving and starting from scratch, starting a brand new journey. I think that's something that I highly respect and appreciate. And I know you have to go soon, but so I mean, thank you for coming on the podcast. It really was a pleasure. I mean, we usually, our podcasts we talk about the person more, but I think this was a very different type of podcast, where we got to um, really build on some concepts, and have those deep talks, and converse about them, and just go back and forth, and saying, what do you think? And it was a unique podcast, but I really, really enjoyed, I guess, experiencing your wisdom, your experience, your knowledge. You talked about the concepts of Bentoism, which were very foreign but very interesting to me. and just a bunch of other stuff. And I think Jaden probably has something else to say as well.
Yeah, I really liked this episode because it seemed more like a really nice like intellectual conversation where we got to exchange our own perspectives on certain topics. And I'd like to say to everyone listening, go check out his book. I know I'm about to right after this. I'll order it on Amazon because I'm excited to see what's in that book. And yeah.
And I'm drawing up my 4 squares right after this. I'm gonna go check, what's my future, what's my present.
Yeah, Bentoism.org. And then if you want to come to the weekly bentos, what that's called, you can just go to bit.ly/weekly bento. Just leave your email and you'll get the invites go out each week. But yeah, please check it out. And and thanks for schooling me on the ways of Canada. And I'm glad to be a new Canadian.
We welcome you with open arms. So thanks so much. It was really a pleasure. Thanks for your energy. Thanks for your humility. Really appreciate the conversation, and we'll see you. And see you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Another episode for you guys. Hopefully I have more coming up soon. And thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and share. Bye-bye.
Peace.